Okay. All right, so here we're going to continue on some with spiritualism. And so where we ended last was how spiritualism became a huge movement in the 1850s. In fact, it was estimated 1 to 2 million people were involved. And again, you know, America was still pretty small at that point. So this is largely on the eastern seaboard there. Okay. And then, as I mentioned, due to a lot of fraudulent activities, it started to go into decline, but especially so because of the American Civil War that disrupts things, right, in the 1860s. However, after the war, it revives again because people are wanting to get in touch with their loved ones, okay? And it's in this context of the second wave of revival that the Theosophical Society emerges. And so let us take a look at them. I never get this right. Okay. The Theosophical Society. Let me kind of just take there. So these are the two founders of this particular group that is a very important group in terms of the history of alternative spirituality, really, okay? They're going to have huge impact. The key figure here is the woman, Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who lived there in the 1800s, as you can see. And then secondly, Colonel Olcott, right? And together they founded the society. Theosophy, Theosophical. Theo is God, Sophia is wisdom. So it's basically a society committed to divine wisdom. They established in 1875. And it is held to be a society that is committed to avoid the theological superstitions of religion on the one hand, and the arrogance of science on the other, with its claim of, you know, the evolution of humanity, that all that exists is this material world, you know, and they're just focused on matter, right? So you've got religion and then science. And then they also held to avoid the fraudulency of it that exists in spiritualism. In order to avoid those negative things, okay, but to promote research and publishing information regarding the ancient wisdom tradition, the primal source of all religions, right? And this ancient wisdom tradition is rooted in the magical tradition of the West, okay, the magical tradition that has developed that is actually the source, really, of all religions, and actually is something that can harmonize with science. So what they're trying to do is present a vision, a model of reality, and just an overall paradigm and vision that can integrate religion, science, and magic, okay, in an integrated way. And that is what really was appealing to a lot of people, because things were really getting fragmented here at this time, especially between religion and science, okay? As I mentioned before, Darwin published his Origin of Species in 1859, and this started to really create a lot of division, that science claims we evolved from apes and religion says this, and, you know, we get the whole battle between religion and science really intensifying here. So anyway, this is a key thing about the society, is what they contribute. And what they did is they created a publishing house business, basically called Quest, that published some of the very first books on yoga and Hinduism and other forms of spirituality, and a lot of things revolving around the occult and magic, and became a major publishing wing established in America. And a lot of people that are going to be the first to teach in my area of comparative religion, all right, in the early 1900s onward, were very much influenced by the Theosophists. Some of them were committed Theosophists, some of the first teachers on Buddhism and Hinduism in the West, okay, as outsiders, as non-Hindus and Buddhists, as Westerners, right? So they had a huge influence here in this whole interest of other religions and promoting the study of other religions and having some of the first books published in this area, right? So they're very important for that. And as we'll see in a bit, they also are very important in India, very much helped support India's independence and getting that set up. They played a key role in that. Okay, but I'm kind of jumping ahead here, just so you know that they're important for a number of factors. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about Helena Blavatsky. She's originally from Russia, from a highly aristocratic family, and really exceptional for the time period. Her mother and grandmother was a scientist. Her grandmother was a well-known scientist at the time, a botanist, in terms of the study of plants, and had a large solarium type thing of studying various plants, had published important work in that area. Her mother was a very much influential novelist and writer, and came from a very highly educated and influential family of women in this regard. However, at the age of 17, she was put into an arranged marriage with a 40-year-old, I think it was a general. I got all the info here, but you know, you don't need to know all the details. Who was a governor, not a general, a governor of a province in Armenia. And so here she was 17, he was 40. That only lasted a couple of weeks and she ran away. Okay, at 17, she ran away. She did not want to be forced in this arranged marriage. And she claims that even as a little girl, she would be able to see spirits and angels and things like this, and that she had these sort of mystical tendencies. Well, the next 25 or so years are a bit of a mystery. She claims that she traveled throughout the world, that she went throughout Asia, India, the Middle East, you know, traveling around, gaining wisdom from these various areas, but especially so in Tibet, where she claims that she had met with and got tutored and guided and taught by these masters, these spiritual masters who were more highly evolved, who have lived for hundreds of years, were these enlightened beings that could choose to materialize and dematerialize, that had overcome the physical limitations of this world. Right? And they're largely going to become known as ascended masters, but there's various terms used for them. I got, you know, so many notes here. Someone's called them the White Brotherhood, the spiritual adepts, the spiritual masters. You know, I got, oh, it's over here, these notes. Various names that she gives them: masters of wisdom, spiritual adepts, Mahatmas, the great souls, okay, that she largely met, and then also the Great White Brotherhood. So all kinds of terminology that's used here for these more highly evolved, enlightened beings, and that she was taught by them, right? And this is where she's getting her ideas from, right? This is a key thing. So that's kind of her story, and eventually she'll be making her way over to New York in the year 1873. Okay, it was 1873, where she then sails over to New York. Well, then, in terms of Colonel Olcott, again, a very interesting man. He was raised in a very strict Presbyterian home, Christian home, but also got into farming in Ohio, and established the American School of Agricultural Science in New York, okay, which again was committed to the study of agriculture. But he left traditional Christianity and got involved in various things that we've already seen: spiritualism that was developing, mesmerism, Freemasonry. Okay, he kind of went that route into alternative spirituality, and then the Civil War happens, right, in the 1860s, and during the Civil War, he became a colonel in the Civil War. And then after the war, he became a lawyer and had established a law firm and a business around that. And then in the year 1870, where is it here? I know again. Yeah, she came over in 73. Yeah, just before that, I know I've got them all written down here. He retired from law, and in 1874, he started to investigate paranormal phenomena, specifically spiritistic phenomena, where spirits are showing up, where people are receiving messages, encountering, claiming that there's evidence of the dead showing up, you know, like a haunted house type of thing. And so he became then a journalist, researching this sort of stuff and then writing articles and having them in the local paper in New York. Okay. So he starts doing that in 1874. Blavatsky had come over to New York in 1873. And then she starts reading Olcott's articles in the paper about his research. And so then she sees that he's investigating this one house that had some kind of a haunting associated with it, some kind of spirit showing up. And so Blavatsky shows up there. And to make a long story short, This is how they meet. She then proves herself to Olcott as being a legitimate medium, that she could contact spirits and things would happen. So they start hooking up together, and they started to form a circle where it was sort of like a type of seance, and they called it the Miracle Club. And people would start to come, and Blavatsky would start teaching things, right? And from that Miracle Club in 1874, a year later is when they thought they officially start what, as I mentioned here, is the Theosophical Society in 1875. Okay, so that's kind of how that gets set up. Okay, and there you go. I probably should have had this before that other slide. Okay, so here you can just read what I just all told you. Well, some of it anyway. Okay. And this is the symbol for the Theosophical Society. Whoops. Okay. And yeah, I don't know why it says it's a video, because it isn't video. There is no religion higher than truth. This is their symbol. And yeah. Now, what I had taught in the other videos where I used the whiteboard, okay, these ideas come from Theosophy, all right? And that this universe is a manifestation of the divine into various forms. So God, the divine, the absolute, the supreme absolute, is seen as sort of a field of pure consciousness that then has chosen that a part of it would materialize into this physical world. And as I mentioned there, devolve, God becoming minerals, becoming the earth and matter, and then from there becoming plant life, and then from there becoming humans and animals, and then humans. And so what we call evolution is really a manifestation of God having the physical experience of this universe, right? And so that we are, as humans, as I mentioned, we are God having the human experience, okay? So as I see here, right, God is having the experience of all forms of life matter. Science's theory of evolution is in fact one of the devolving of the divine. And so she held that we humans, though, now have forgotten who we are, where we came from, you know, and who our true nature. And we are now on a journey of awakening to realize that, oh, we are God having the human experience. We're not just more highly evolved animals, okay? There's more to who we are. So we need to awaken to that truth. And as we do, she held, then we're able to ascend, return back to the Godhead. And we can then leave this plane of material existence and move on to other dimensions of reality. Okay, so that's sort of the journey that we're on. And that there are those ahead of us, as I mentioned, the ascended masters, the spiritual adepts that are more highly evolved, right? They've gone ahead of us and they're showing us the way. And Blavatsky claimed that she was in contact with some of these beings, getting information and guidance from some of these beings, okay? And that some of them are meant to then guide the whole planet, become world teachers, teaching us and leading humanity into this higher evolution, all right, to attain ascension, okay? And yeah, and so there you go. This is sort of what I covered in that other video. But here you've got it a bit in a slide, but I felt like I needed to kind of draw it out on a whiteboard so you can kind of really get this. But this comes from Theosophy. Okay. And so then here, you know, again, just some pictures here, there are various ascended masters. So they're generally the enlightened ones throughout history, you know, from figures like Krishna, Jesus, Buddha, various figures that she held are these ascended beings. And they are sort of like guardians. They are the wise ones watching over the planet. Okay, some of us who are receptive will receive channeled information from them, and they'll be speaking through certain people to bring us into this higher movement towards evolving into our true selves, our true nature. Right? They are guiding the planet in various ways and showing up in various ways. And so tied in also with what she taught along these lines, she also, you know how I moved that slide about the different dimensions of reality. Remember, there's a physical plane, the astral plane, the etheric plane, all those different planes in that one video that I made on the whiteboard. now that's a super simplified version. Okay. For each plane, there are also like 7 other planes. Like the astral plane is not just one astral plane, but there are 7 astral planes. And, again, it's very complex, and I do not at all have a grip on it because it's very detailed and complex, way more than what I need to know or want you to know, okay? And I don't getting into all that. But with it, she kind of really maps out in a very complex way just the different dimensions and how it all evolves. And so one thing I just want to bring in here is that she developed the idea of there being root races. And this is something that's going to show up in terms of Hitler, Adolf Hitler, and those who were involved in his circle. A number of them got into some of Theosophy, and a lot of the spiritual ideas that they were working with that also influenced Hitler had come from Theosophy. And that's where we get this idea of the Aryan race. Okay, and the swastika as a symbol was actually a very ancient Indian symbol that got taken over by the Nazis, all right, and they just switched the way the arrows turn. Okay, but they actually got that originally from India, and that's something I forgot to tell you in terms of the history, because I don't have it in the slide, is that Blavatsky and Olcott, they end up going to India and becoming extremely popular and extremely influential in India. Okay, and I'll tell you more about that in a sec. Let me just kind of go through this first. So what she held is that in terms of our evolution here as human beings, it's not just, again, that, we're more evolved monkeys. Like, no, she doesn't buy that whole idea at all in terms of the theory of evolution. It's held that the very first root race of what's going to become human beings, she called it the self-born. And they lived in this mysterious place that she called the imperishable sacred land. And we weren't fully materialized. We were somewhat materialized, but just more of a blob. There was just a very basic kind of a shell, material shell of some kind to hold our spirit, that indestructible divine spark within. And we were of no gender in that first root race. There was neither male nor female. We're just pure spirit, just generally encased in something material, all right, that's rather formless. Then the second root race that developed out of that is what she called the sweat-born or Hyperborean. And here we were boneless, no bones yet in structure, but more materialized, but still without gender, but still of more material substance. And we lived on the continent of the North Pole. Okay. Then out of that, we developed into what you call the third root race, called the Lemurians. They now began to be physical the way we are physical today, all right, having a real body with a bone structure, and also being male and female, having gender, right? And so here are where we have the first humans as such, with physical means of reproduction, and also the beginnings of good versus evil, right? Good and evil choices. And then you get moral dilemma and the possibility of destruction. And so the Lemurians, this ancient root race or ancient civilization, if you like, lived in the continent of, on a continent that used to exist, okay, of the south of the Gobi Desert that now is filled in by the Indian Ocean. So it's underneath the Indian Ocean. And this took place 18 million years ago, where for who knows whatever reason, the ocean took over and filled that area that the Lemurians used to exist. Then from the Lemurians, though, had evolved the fourth root race, the Atlanteans, of a few thousand years ago. And that was another continent that was under the Atlantic Ocean. And the reason why it's called the Atlantic Ocean is because this is of the lost continent of the Atlanteans and the lost civilization of the Atlanteans. And this is definitely an ancient idea that goes all the way back to Plato. There's references to it in the Greco-Roman world. There was a belief that there was this ancient civilization that got destroyed, known as the Atlanteans, destroyed by massive flooding. Okay, so you get this flood story all over the world, and there seems to be evidence of ancient civilizations. Like there's a lot of anomalies in terms of archaeological remains here and there that seem that it's possible there could be some basis to this idea. But then she held that coming out of the Atlanteans was the fifth race, the Aryan race. okay, that had evolved, and that's largely, you know, the Europeans and the people that we have today, and that there's now coming forth a sixth root race starting to appear in America, and that are those who are more psychically developed, having developed their spiritual capacities. We're moving into the sixth root race. And I'm not too clear on this, but it seems that when we get to the seventh is when, again, most of the human race can leave this physical domain and move on to the next level. Okay, so that in terms of our the Earth School, and this time here on planet Earth on the physical plane has been a journey of these going through these root races, and there's going to be 7 of them altogether before we leave to go on to the next dimension and next level of this whole journey. It's very convoluted, but I just want to bring this in so that you can see here how Theosophy, they bring in this idea, and what gets developed is that, oh, these lost civilizations of the Atlanteans and whatnot, and Lemurians, you'll find references to these sorts of things in a lot of popular spirituality today. And then also how Hitler kind of worked with the idea of trying to purify the Aryan race, how that kind of came in here a bit as well, okay? Just so you can kind of see the influence and connections historically a bit on all this, okay? All right. Now I had mentioned that they went to India. Okay, I'll bring that up again at the end here in terms of India. Let me just kind of go on here a bit more with these ideas. I hope I don't mess you guys up too much. I really don't like having slides and following slides because I'd rather just go through all my notes. And it's like, so much material. But anyways, they also popularized the idea of there being Akashic records, okay? And that is possible. The Akashic records is tied in sort of with what we called, what I talked about in that other video, it's the astral plane. And if you remember how I talked about people experiencing ghosts and maybe sometimes having visions, that whatever has happened throughout history, right? If it's a person walking the sheep across the road at this certain place all the time, day after day after day, through repetition, it leaves an imprint on the Akashic field, this energy field. And if there is a very emotionally intense battle or something, you know, terrible happens somewhere, that leaves like an energetic imprint, all right, on the energy field of that place, right? That's sort of the Akashic field. They call it the Akashic field. And so it kind of keeps a record of everything. It gets encoded, right? And then it's held that really time doesn't even exist. So all that's happened in the past is encoded, but also what's going to happen in the future is encoded. And that is possible for a person through meditation to read the records, to access the information that's imprinted on this energetic field that transcends time. And it's almost like a library. And that's why you've got that picture there, like a library that keeps the records of all that has been and all that will be across time and space. Everything is already there to be known. And it's held that this information can channel to us, or that our consciousness can access it, right? Or some other being brings that information to us. You know, it can either go either way. That's sort of the idea here. So this is a popular teaching you'll get out there about accessing these Akashic records for information. Okay, and this is something that was popularized by the Theosophists. And yeah, and I need to mention too, well, I got that part here. They played a key role in introducing a lot of Eastern concepts to the West. They published the first books on yoga, you know, Hinduism, Buddhism, Eastern philosophy and teachings, the occult. They made popular the concepts of karma and reincarnation. Okay, all these things they popularized. And key thing too is they advocated the idea that this world is governed by these enlightened beings that I mentioned earlier. And they also started to promote, and this is just after Blavatsky herself, her followers, that a world teacher is going to appear on earth to guide us, the coming of a world teacher. And you know, you'll have this idea that gets played on here, that just as you have in Judaism, the idea of the coming of a Messiah, And then in Christianity, it's believed that Jesus is that Messiah that the Jews were expecting. And in Christianity, how that Jesus came the first time, and was crucified and raised from the dead. And he is going to return in the future. There's going to be a second coming of Christ. Well, then that gets picked up by, in Islam, the idea that there is indeed going to be a return of the hidden Imam amongst the Shia, the Imam Mahdi, who will, destroy the Antichrist like Jesus. And yes, and Jesus will show up and be a part of that, but not the way Christians think. He'll be a Muslim, so you'll have these ideas of the return. Well, then you also have in Buddhism, the idea that the Buddha, he came here in our life, well, not our lifetimes, but in this age for us. Then we have the Buddha of the present, but there was a Buddha of the past, and Buddhism is going to be forgotten, and it's going to be a Buddha of the future, known as Maitreya. Maitreya is the Buddha of the future. And so this idea that there's going to be somebody coming, an enlightened being, if it be a Christ or the Buddha of the future, Maitreya, is kind of what gets played on here. And so they're going to work with this idea that, yes, indeed, there's going to be an enlightened one who's going to appear to lead us into goodness and truth and enlightenment in the future. And so there's going to be all kinds of little groups that will be teaching this idea of the coming of a world teacher to the planet to lead us into our, our future evolution, that sort of thing. So key thing is, they end up going to India. Okay, Blavatsky and Olcott, they go to India in 1878. Okay, December of 1878. They go to India. They become a smashing success there, very influential in India. And while they're in India, unlike most Westerners, they were promoting the idea that Hinduism is a source of wisdom for the West. Whereas the British, when they came over to India, they thought, oh, Hinduism is a barbaric religion. Look at the caste system. Oh, they burn the widows. If their husband dies, the women are expected to burn themselves and throw themselves on the cremation, on the funeral pyre and die. The burning of widows. Children given off to marriage before they even reach puberty at the ages of 8. And then again, all the injustice of the caste system and just leaving people who starving on the streets, abandoning orphans, no caring for the poor and the needy in any kind of a way, and so the British, they brought in hospitals and orphanages and, education for women and, to get rid of the caste system or wanting to, or just, whatever, all this sorts of stuff. Okay. So they had, basically the West saw Hinduism as being primitive. But now the Blavatsky and the Theosophists, oh no, this is a source of wisdom. You should be proud of your religion. And so they played a key role in supporting Hinduism and Buddhism. And Buddhism was virtually dead in India. It's still just hanging on in Sri Lanka, and Olcott is renowned for having revitalized Buddhism in Sri Lanka. All right, encouraging them and providing leadership as to how they could have it grow and get well established and spread, and really supported Buddhism there. So anyways, they get well established there. And let me just follow on this, just so you know a bit of the history. So while they're in India and they got a lot of success, and as I mentioned, some after them are going to play a key role in supporting India's political move to gain its independence from the British. And one of their members, Annie Besant, was the leading the Indian National Congress, whatever the party was. I forget the exact name of the Indian National Congress or the party, until Mahatma Gandhi joined, and then he became the leader, and she was quickly forgotten because now they had one of their own instead of a Western woman being a leader of this movement. But just so you know, they play a key role in supporting and organizing, helping to organize the movement for India's independence. Okay. Now, while Blavatsky and Olcott are there in India for a few years, what happens is there's a couple there that are running and looking after the gardens and the house and kind of basically being servants, looking after things. They discover that there were some dummies that were made that supposedly looked like the ascended masters materializing. They found that there were these convenient little, behind the wall, a little door that could be slid open where things could appear and disappear, and also from the ceiling where a letter could drop down, that they claimed, oh, the Ascended Master has just dropped us a handwritten letter giving us a message. And it was like through these fake little, things in the roof, in the ceiling that they had. So they discovered some of these things. They started accusing Blavatsky of being a fraud. And to make a long story short, it gets investigated. Remember, the Parapsychological Association got established in Britain in the 1882. I got it written down here somewhere. And so they started investigating this, and they put together a report of a few hundred pages, and they conclude that indeed Blavatsky, there seems to be enough evidence to indicate that she is fraudulent. So that really gets her. She was thinking of suing them and but she ends up leaving India and abandons it and just stays in Europe until she dies. And she does some writing. She writes a number of books. Okay. But in the meantime, she has followers there that continue on. And so what then goes on down the road is one of their followers, Leadbeater, along with Annie Besant, Leadbeater took on certain young boys and would train them in the occult, train them in spiritual masteries of various kinds. And so there's one young boy that he took on and became the legal guardian of, basically sort of adopted him, is Krishnamurti. Okay, Krishnamurti. And he was going through all this spiritual training and development and whatnot. And they were expecting that Krishnamurti would be and was the world teacher to stand up and speak forth and offer leadership to the world and bringing us into enlightenment. And so they had it all set up in New York one day, where Krishnamurti now is a young man, I think something like 21. They were expecting him to stand up and give this announcement in front of a huge crowd. And instead, he totally renounces it all. And he makes the statement that basically there is not to be a world teacher, is not a world teacher that's going to bring other people into enlightenment. You shouldn't be looking for a savior to do this for you. You need to make the journey for yourself spiritually. You need to make that your own inner journey to connect with God, what have you. There's not going to be a savior type figure like a world teacher to do it for you. You've got to do the work. And he renounces the Theosophists, and he leaves New York and gets on a boat and goes back to Europe. And that's where he meets Joseph Campbell, is on that boat. And anyway, so there's all these interesting connections here historically, okay, with Joseph Campbell as well. So, but and that kind of ended that. They were all quite surprised. But ever since then Krishnamurti became a very famous spiritual teacher on his own terms, lots of books written by him, large following around him, where he basically holds that, you just have to make the journey yourself. Okay. It's an inner journey between you and the divine. It's your work. Do not just, have that work done for you by simply being a part of a religion, a part of a group. It's an inner journey that depends on you to do. Okay. That's basically his idea. So anyways, I just want to, again, he was came through the Theosophical system and being trained and developed in his spiritual practices. And just so you know that all these things happened. Okay. All right. Okay, and so this is just a sum of that other video that I did. I just put it here in writing, that reality in itself is multidimensional, consisting of several dimensions of different vibrational frequencies, going from slow, and therefore slow vibrational frequency is heavy and dense, and that's what makes this matter, what we call matter. And then the faster the frequency goes, it's faster, things become lighter and more subtle in nature, and then kind of less material as such. And so you've got these various levels: physical, etheric, astral, mental, causal, spiritual. Okay. And again, various groups, people adapt and work with these in various ways. You'll find variations. I'm just kind of highlighting the basic ideas here, okay, that people will work with. Blavatsky is a very more complex version, but she really is a huge inspiration behind popularizing the type of idea. And that in some way here on the earth plane, our destiny is to raise our vibrational frequency and attain ascension, okay, to eventually dematerialize and leave the earth plane altogether. And developing our psychic abilities, these supernatural powers, are evidence of our overcoming the limitations of physicality. Okay, we're overcoming the limitations of physicality is a key thing. So, and here I just wanted to put in writing, because again, these ideas become very popular, okay, is a lot of teachings that come out of this is that you create your own reality, right? And this happens in basically 3 ways. Number 1, you create your own reality through the power of intention, okay, of mind over matter. That at that causal plane, any beliefs that I hold very deeply, it's not just a passing thought going through my head, but it's a belief that is I hold to strongly and deeply with strong intention, and you put it forth. And because you so deeply believe it, it's like boom, you're putting out, boom, you're putting out, boom, you're putting. It's consistent, right? So it's not like a thought that comes and goes and is this and that. No, it's a consistent, deep belief. And that just like whew, goes forth into the causal plane, and it kind of forms a blueprint, an energetic blueprint that some would call a thought form. And the more you put that intention there, that thought form, it becomes heavier and heavier and more dense. I mean, it's the way a lot of people describe it, okay? More and more heavy and dense, and eventually it will materialize. And you can create your own reality, right? And you'll get various teachings on this. In the film The Secret and various books written around that, the law of attraction, things through resonance, things then will fit energetically with that and will support it and strengthen it, and it will grow and it will materialize. The power of visualization. Okay, and we know that there's some truth to this. Absolutely, there's evidence that supports this in all kinds of ways. Okay, there is definitely some truth. It's just how far is that? How far do you go with that truth? But there's a lot of evidence that supports this. That the consciousness can indeed affect material existence, and mind over matter, mind over body. That's why even in a lot of say if you had cancer, they would encourage you to practice visualization. To see that your healthy white, cells are eating up those bad cancer cells, and just to see that, visualize that, right? And then your body, what you imagine, what you image, what you see in your mind, okay, your body takes it as a truth, as a reality. It doesn't question it. And that's why athletes will visualize, they're going down the course of a race, and they visualize and experience in their mind first every move, every turn. They're going to do this, they're going to do, and they just see it, they see it, they run it through their mind. Again, the data is there. They've done tons of research and studies on this, that seriously works and improves your performance in a race, for example, for athletes. That this indeed can improve and increase your success of overcoming an illness through the power of visualization, right? Anyway, there's tons of stuff there. I could talk for hours, and I'd have to, again, fully prepare for that. But just so you know, there's a lot out there on this, okay? That indeed there's something to this. And indeed, this seems to be what is a key behind the workings of traditional magic. It is the power of will, okay? The intention is a key thing. You intend something. There's even prayer. This is intention. Okay, it has it's a huge factor in here. So wait, that's one way of creating your reality, and this is very popular as a teaching in the New Spirituality. Okay. Now, a second way of how you create your own reality is through past karma. And as I mentioned, the Theosophists very much play a key role in popularizing in the West the concept of karma and the concept of reincarnation in past lives. Okay, because that's like not a Western idea. All right, it's just not there. It's like you just have the one life, end of story. So they introduce these ideas. And so here the idea that gets popular is that your past, whatever you did in a past life, creates this karmic energy, and it is then basically going to determine your future life, different things you'll experience in your future life. So if you have a lot of crap coming down on you in this life, it's just a payback for the bad karma of your past life. Okay. And so, and you'll hear people say some pretty drastic, and I'll give you some just the drastic statements just so you can see how far people go. But there are people who have said and would say that, say, during World War II with the Holocaust and, the attempt to wipe out the Jewish people in Europe at that time, okay, that was an outworking of their past karma, that they deserved that. All right. That it's, and here people will say, you are never, ever, ever a victim of anything. If something is going on in your life, it's because of your past karma. You've brought it about your own self, okay, from your past life. So you are never a victim. So there's no place here for victimhood whatsoever. You create your own reality because it's your past karma that's showing up, right? So that's pretty, drastic. It raises big issues about justice here, right? Definitely. And then the third element, our way of how you create your own reality that's popular here, is through the idea that there are soul contracts you've entered into before you reincarnate. So after you leave this world at death, and you're there, who knows where, somewhere on another plane of existence, you enter into a contract with other souls. And you'll say, yeah, okay, as part of I'm God having the experience of all aspects of reality, God having the human experience, the experience of being black, being white, being a woman, being a man, being young, being old, being sick, being crippled, being poor, being rich. Like we are all God having these experiences. And so you'll say, well, geez, I've never had the experience of being raped and murdered. And this other soul will say, well, I've never had the experience of doing that to somebody. I mean, I know it sounds hokey, but I tell you, there'll be people who say this, and I'm not kidding. I've heard people say this. I've read books that say this. They enter into a soul contract, a commitment that, yes, okay, well, in our next incarnation, we commit to making this happen, that I will have the experience of being someone who raped and murdered a person, and you'll have the experience of having undergone that. Okay, so you enter into these contracts, and it's held that this is all for just having the experience, and through this learning and growing and having all aspects that are possible of human experience and even animal experience and all of material life experience. Okay, so these are three concepts that you'll find out there. Different people will emphasize different things. Again, there's always a lot of diversity, but these are some of the ideas. Okay, hopefully, excuse me, that all makes sense. Okay, well, I think I'll end this recording here. Where am I here? Not pause. No, stop. Stop.